Hi everyone, my name is Ken Finnegan and today I'm going to be talking to you about deploying the OpenTelemetry Collector Helm chart in the deployment mode where it's a single deployment of the OpenTelemetry Collector. And the kind of agenda for today, we're going to recap what that deployment mode architecture looks like. We're going to cover some of the use cases as to why you might deploy the collector with this pattern. And then we're going to deploy it to a Kubernetes cluster and see some of the things we can do with it there. So in a previous session, I kind of walked through what this single deployment mode of the collector could look like. So this is an example here where all the applications are sending their telemetry to that single collector. But in essence, we have a single deployment of OpenTelemetry. We may have some replica counts there to increase the number of instances there to handle load, but there'll only be one single deployment type configuration. Now for today's video, we're going to kind of extend a previous video where we had the collector deployed as an agent, and we're going to have them send telemetry to this gateway collector. Now, in terms of use cases, this gateway collector or single deployment can be used as an example like here, where you're having a central point before sending your telemetry out of a cluster that you're running. This gives you a good opportunity to set any cluster level metadata you want on the telemetry you're creating. And it also gives a good failure point within the cluster if communication with external sources are having intermittent issues. You can also deploy this kind of gateway as on a regional basis within the cloud environments if you feel you have the need to as well. So let's kind of dive into why we would deploy it this way. So as I mentioned, there's some centralized processing for telemetry being passed through that you might use it for. This single deployment is also handy for retrieving the Kubernetes events from the environment, and also like cluster metrics and anything where you want to get a single copy of. If we were to use the agent mode to collect Kubernetes events, every single agent would be collecting those events. So we'd end up with a duplication of those events for however many nodes we had in our cluster, which is not what we want. We only want that information once. So let's have a look at how we can do this. So let's deploy, well, actually, first, let's have a look at what we have in our values file for the Helm chart. So we can see we're using the deployment mode. It's the usual contrib repository. As in a previous video, we're going to export everything to OTel2e so that we can visualize it. And that's all we have for that. So let's deploy that now. We're going to give it a name of my gateway. And we should see that momentarily that is running. So we have that running. Let's deploy a log generator so that we can actually produce some data. Now, the next thing we want to do is deploy our agent. So that's going to use a slightly different configuration file. So let's look at this. Let's take a look at what values we have in that agent deployment. We can see we have the daemon set. We're adding the additional Kubernetes attributes, pod labels, pod annotations. We have a processor to set the service name. And notice here that we have the endpoint. Previously we were using OTel2e, but this one needs to use the gateway so that it can send information to that gateway. And that's about all there is different on that deployment. So let's deploy that now. So it said it didn't exist. Let's see. Okay, so we've got the 2 for each of the nodes starting up. And if we go over to our log viewer, we can see we're getting the logs that are flowing from the agent collectors to the gateway collector and then to OTel2e. And this has the same information we've had previously, where we have the labels from the deployment and the annotations and all the Kubernetes metadata. So this is great. One thing that this doesn't have, though, is we don't know which cluster it came from. So let's fix that. So to add a cluster name to our processing, let's edit our deployment to make that possible. So to do that, we want to add a processor, in this case a resource processor. We're telling it to set an attribute of cluster underscore name to a value of my personal cluster. And the action here is upsert. So what this does is it says, if the value is present, then update it. If the value is not present, then insert it. Now, the reason we're overriding any existing value is maybe some applications might be setting this in some way, and we want to make sure we have a consistent name for our cluster. Now, to activate this processor, we need to add it to our pipelines and include the default processors, the memory limiter, and the batch. So if we save that and deploy the gateway, there we go, deploy the gateway, and then check the pods, and it's running. So now if we go over to our logs here, and we'll search for log generator and get to a recent one. Scrolling. There we go. So we can see over here, we now have a cluster name on our resource attributes. And this is a great way to identify which cluster a particular entry came from, particularly if you have multiple deployments across many clusters, that having the node and pod information just isn't enough, because you may end up with duplicates. So you want to be able to identify exactly which cluster something is running in. So now the next thing we want to do is include Kubernetes events. This is another kind of interesting thing we can do here, and let's get this enabled. So we want to come over and edit our deployments, and this is going to be a preset. I'll just make that a bit there. So similar to enabling log collection in the daemon set deployments, in the gateway here, we can enable the capturing of Kubernetes events. Now, one thing to point out is right now we only have one replica of the gateway being deployed, which is fine. If we were to scale that gateway to multiple replicas, then the Kubernetes events processing, we'd want to have in a different deployment so that we could scale one without impacting how many events we're actually retrieving and creating duplicates. So let's save that and redeploy it again. And get the pods, make sure everything's good. Awesome. Thanks for taking the time to watch today. I hope you enjoyed it and look forward to speaking again soon.